Ali, you're so welcome to the Happier at Work podcast. I'm delighted to have you as my guest today. Do you want to give people a little bit of a background, how you got into doing what you're doing, and we'll take the conversation from there?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's honestly an honor and a pleasure. I mean, it's great to see what you're doing, and it seems as though if only there were more companies and more presences like yours, we would live in a better world. So thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'm Ali. I'm Ally Fekaiki, the founder and CEO of Juno. Juno's mission is to give power and flexibility to all employees around the world to make their own decisions when it comes to their benefits and their well-being. Kind of born out of my own personal frustration, having worked in a variety of different tech startups and feeling like, even though the businesses mean well, they just don't get it right when it comes to, my happiness and the happiness of my peers. And ultimately, it comes down to being able to give people the choice and the power to make their own decisions. For some people, well-being is one thing, and for others, it's something completely different. So Juno is essentially a flexible marketplace-based platform that employees get an allowance from their employer, and they can use their allowance on whatever they need. Now, that has meant that employers are very happy because they can go the extra mile and they don't have to worry about keeping everyone globally included, let's say. And we've got people, taking trips with their Juno points, getting food boxes delivered, doing yoga classes, connecting with their community. And very soon, actually, they're going to be able to buy tickets to concerts and cultural events and all sorts of fun stuff like that. So we're really kind of redefining what well-being at work and happiness at work really is.
Brilliant. And I suppose in terms of redefining and kind of going back to your own experiences, how would you originally have perceived well-being at work versus what you perceive it to be now?
You're very two-dimensional, to be honest with you. I mean, my LinkedIn cover picture is, what if well-being was more than belly breaths and lunges? And it's a bit of an outdated, I think we should probably change that at some point, but it's been there for 4 years. But essentially, I felt like in my experience, well-being was very much sort of the purview of a lunchtime meditation or a morning yoga class. And there's nothing wrong with those things. In fact, I have practiced them myself. But ultimately, most people, if we're being completely honest, that doesn't really resonate with most people. I would say that the problem in the past is that companies will offer a set menu of a couple of things that are very sort of Eastern medicine, well-being related, and delight a very small percentage of their team, whilst also ticking the box. We do a lot for well-being. You've got the lunchtime meditation and the evening breath work, and we're going to bring in a psychologist to talk about sleep. But, like, there are people that in accounts, and no offense to accounts, but there are people like in back office. Or,
what are you saying about accounts, Ali?
Sales, or people all over the company, and me included at the time, that would just roll their eyes at that stuff and be like, well, that's not useful.
Yeah.
To put it into real terms, if you're a parent and you've got the school run, you're not turning up early an hour early to work to do a yoga class. Like, it's not happening.
Yeah.
And benefits should benefit people, well-being should be, for me at least, I feel like you should meet people where they are. If James in accounts doesn't want to go to yoga, and I'm sure he doesn't, then perhaps getting his house cleaned once a month would help him. And then after that, a couple of months of that, then he might think, okay, well, maybe I should try getting my veggie boxes delivered. And maybe then after that, I'll dabble in a Headspace membership. And then all of a sudden they're on the train. But if you meet them immediately with, let's do meditation, to someone who's just alien to that and not willing, you're not going to get very far. So you've got to meet people where they are in that case.
Yeah. I think, and I could be wrong. And it's nearly 5 years now since I left the corporate world. When I worked in corporate, it was kind of a well-being week, and we invited various different speakers in. It wasn't anything spread out over the year. It wasn't kind of once a month or anything like that, which I see happening now. But having said that, I still see it as very much a box ticking type of exercise. And my perception of what well-being is, or how people perceive well-being is, that it's it's fruit bowls, or it's bringing, like you said, someone in to do a yoga or something like that. But for me, the fundamental piece of creating happier working environments, and some people call this well-being as well, is the having the foundations set up correctly to begin with, before you even think about those kind of additional benefits, if you like, those additional things that you could do. You know, whether you're getting someone in to do the yoga, or whether you're providing free fruit or subsidized lunches, or whatever it might be. Any thoughts on that, on the fact that oftentimes it's kind of a box ticking thing, that we've said, oh yeah, well, you know, we've done that now. Maybe you don't see it because the types of clients that you deal with are interested in that, but I'd love to get your thoughts.
Well, I mean, the clients that do, our clients, or the businesses that do it well, they don't even see it as a box. Well-being is a box. It's just a systemic, you know, it's a system. It's a part of the business. It's part of the DNA. And now that isn't because they want it to be a happy and clappy place to work in and of itself. They recognize that if they want to attract and retain the best talent, if they want people to really work extremely hard and go the extra mile for the business, if they want their business to attract more business and make more money, and have clients themselves, if that's their purview, this needs to be one of the considerations, you know, one of the aspects of their business. You know, at the end of the day, when it's a box ticking exercise, it's because well-being is a box. You know, it's a box which is like, well, we should probably do something so that we say that we do it, and that no one can argue that we don't. But the businesses that do it very well, and by the way, it doesn't have to be from the very beginning, you know, it's a learned thing. But businesses who actually think about it holistically and think, well, at the end of the day, and this is on your website, and I think it's pretty accepted wisdom now, that your people are your most valuable asset. People are your business, and we don't really invest enough in them. We invest in technology, we invest in R&D, we invest in lots of other sort of, let's call them intangible, more kind of tangible parts.
You probably can make a clearer ROI from those tangible things rather than people, although there are ways to look at how much it costs when you lose someone from an organization, you know, and estimating how much, like, and why are people leaving? Is it because, and let's kind of go even beyond that, like let's go to the I heard someone talking about ill-being. So ill-being, and it's not just about well-being, it's when people are burning out, or when they, you know, as Jacinda Ardern has said in her resignation speech, that she just has nothing left in the tank. So when people get to that stage and they've nothing left to give, that's cost the company money.
But it's important to note that, like, Juno is not a panacea for this. Like, you can't just combat, you know, we try not to ever really refer to Juno and burnout in the same breath, really, because, you know, these things are very complicated, and people are very complicated, and situations are very complicated. And ultimately, you know, Juno and good benefits is just a piece of a puzzle, a tapestry, let's call it. And, you know, in the foundation, I think a lot of businesses need to think about their model and the way that they do business, and how that impacts their people, in the same way that they might think about sustainability. A lot of companies will talk a big game when it comes to ESG, but they overwork their staff, or they don't treat them in the right way, or whatever. There's a model that's very unfriendly and not employee first, and they don't realize that. The box ticking obfuscates that, I think.
You
know, take an example of an agency model, a very large agency. You know, the margins in that business are razor thin, and a lot of the cream rises to the top, meaning the partners and maybe the network will get the lion's share of the profits there. And so what's left for the people and the team is kind of a pittance, really. And so, you know, they're going to bring on more work, because that's the name of the game, bring on more client work, and just keep stretching people's bandwidth. You know, yes, they do bring in freelancers, because I've been in that environment myself. And yes, they bring in more people for client work, but it's usually never enough. So people end up feeling very burnt out, because, you know, a big client has come on board and they haven't hired enough. So the model needs to be something that they consider, I think.
Yeah.
And then there are, you know, in the tapestry, there are lots of other elements, you know, culture, values, what you're able to accept, you know, how people interact with each other and so on.
I think, I mean, the kind of the bigger picture here, and I don't want to dwell on this point too much because it's not really what today is about, but it's rethinking the future of work, I suppose, as a series of projects that you don't necessarily have to stay loyal to one organization, that you can move from project to project, and maybe groups of people can move from project to project together, depending on where the demand is for that type of work. I came from that agency background as well, and I absolutely know that, like, you sell more stuff into your clients, or you bring on a new client, and it's not necessarily resourced. And I know in some instances they were deliberately under-resourced because they wanted to retain a high level of profitability. And we did have quite high margins actually within that business. And they were higher than, say, in the Irish business, they were higher than the UK business. And for the powers that be, they wanted to retain that high level of profitability for, you know, for KPIs and things like that, rather than, you know, and that was totally at the expense of people. So it comes back to this idea of looking at people and people's well-being versus profit.
Well, it's systemic, you know, it's all about incentives, you know, like people, we live in an incentivized, this is it's in our nature, you know, it's in our nature. And there needs to be a framing of this, because it's not, you know, I think that it's not black and white, you know, ultimately businesses that put their people first, and this is proven time and time again, do very well. But also businesses that treat their people badly or don't have a great culture also do very well. You know?
Let's not name any names.
No, I was about to, but I
no, I was joking. Because I think, you know,
well, then, like,
anyone,
a company like Revolut and Uber and those, that I'm not going to say that I've experienced it, but you hear that they don't have the best culture. Goldman Sachs, for example.
Yeah, Amazon, Twitter. Yeah,
exactly. And ultimately, the question is, would they have done better if they had a better culture? I don't know if the answer. I think probably potentially not, you know. So the question really is, you know, it is the choice that the business is making, and ultimately, if a business thinks in ones and zeros, or in numbers and financial terms, then, you know, it is very clear the correlation between empowering people to enjoy their work and to feel good and to enjoy coming into work and to be well, and the bottom line. There is a correlation, especially now, because people, I mean, if you speak to hiring managers, and I'm sure you know more than I do, people are just walking out of jobs because they don't like it. That's a pretty, you know, that's a generational thing. And I don't mean generation in terms of age. People are all ages, but it's a workplace generational thing. Where now, whereas maybe in the 90s or prior to that, you'd stick to a job and this is your job, it's your livelihood and your life. But people are just resigning. Yeah, I don't like the culture. It wasn't a good fit for me.
I think
what do you have lined up? Nothing. Okay.
Yeah. And that was me twice, you know, and I think perhaps it's an evolution thing. And I think perhaps people are seeing that you don't have to stay in something that doesn't align. Like I suppose from my own perspective, I want to eliminate toxic cultures to make sure that we don't have toxic cultures anymore. Not everyone is going to resonate with that. Some people are happy, like you say, to stay in that culture where it's, you know, maybe it's competitive, or maybe they're not being treated the best, but they have a really great name on their CV as a result, and they want to stay for 2 or 3 years so that it looks like they've contributed something, or you know, something like that. Whereas, you know, I think from a toxic workplace perspective, if, you know, some people are realizing that they have options and they leave.
Yeah, and I think COVID really kind of accelerated the concept that, well, I'm just going to put myself first. You know, I'm not going to sacrifice my peace of mind for a business, for a company, for employment. You know, I think that, by the way, you know, I think that this is I have to caveat all of this with, this is a very white collar problem. This is a very, in many ways, if I may use the word, privileged problem to have, because a lot of people don't have the ability to walk.
You're so right. Yeah.
And we need to remember that, right? Like, I was thinking about doing a podcast, asked to a podcast by my marketing peers in the business, and about, interviewing founders and CEOs. Like, yeah, that's good, but actually I'd just rather interview just regular folks with jobs, like nurses and people, who I don't live in London, but I have heard so much about the strikes, the tube strikes, right? I have never, not once, heard ever a tube driver speak ever about why. And that might be because I don't read the news. But it's not in the mainstream media. Where are these people? Why is there not an Amazon worker? I'm sure there is. Excuse my ignorance, but why have I not seen a podcast talking to someone who works in an Amazon warehouse, talking about, what their life is like?
Yeah.
The people that enable our society. Today I got some books and some packages, and someone delivered that to me.
Yeah. But someone also had to pick it, or a robot.
By the way, the book that I got was this. This is a good book, The Laws of Human Nature by Robert.
Oh, I must check it out. Yeah, I love that. And I don't deliberately ask people for books, and I'm a huge fan of books. You don't want to even see the stack of books I have, and I write summaries of the books and I put them on my website and everything. But more often than not, people will suggest a book to read when I'm on the podcast. And I listen to other podcasts where people specifically ask, "Oh, do you have a book to recommend?" And of course, I'll furiously write down like what book they recommended. So thank you for that recommendation.
Of course, I can give you plenty. I have to admit, though, I don't finish books. I just kind of, I tend to be a bit of a millennial with that stuff. I speed read very often and don't finish them. I need to work on that. Sure.
I think I have a tendency to finish books even if I don't think they're that great. Like, there's only one book I think that I got about halfway through and I just thought, this is actually painful to read. I can't read anymore. But for the most part, I will finish no matter what. But I think, again, that's the other extreme. This is why should I finish something if it's not brilliant, or if it's not doing what I expected? Then, we've taken a whole other aside here.
So, I know. A little bit off piece, but that's a good sign.
Exactly. That's what I love about making this podcast. So, Ally, I suppose coming back to this concept of well-being at work, we kind of started with this, like, it's not like previously maybe would have thought to have been a specific type of service or a product that you give your employees, and very much a box ticking. I love how you described it as it's a systemic thing. It needs to be part of the fabric of the organization, part of the culture, that you're putting people first, and it's about people's well-being. How do you think things have evolved, and what are the kind of things that you think contribute to well-being now beyond kind of what you offer at Juno?
Yeah, I mean, I think, pardon me for using cliched phrases, but we live in a very individualistic society. People are much, especially in the West, much more incentivized to work towards their own aims. I see that as a first-time founder and a person who thought he was a better manager of people than he actually is, but I'm learning. But I'm learning a lot about, people are far more interested, and fair enough, in their own ends. I actually just skimmed past a LinkedIn post about how, seeing the layoffs by all these big tech companies. The truth is that these companies don't care about you, and you should be focusing on building your own brand. Now, I think what Juno is doing, and what we're doing with the business, is kind of leaning into that, which is that we live in an individualized world, and in the working world, where a business is really a collective, right? Like, if you take great businesses, they are a collective of people that work under one banner, which is the brand, and that still occurs on a daily basis. And very successful companies have employees that believe in the cult of the business, right? Because that's what it takes. Is is a collectivization, a church almost. And so the question is, how do great businesses get built when we live in an increasingly individualized world of work and world in general? And it can still be done. You know, I give an example of Oyster HR, where one of our clients, and we're big admirers of Oyster, and it seems to me, at least from my understanding and my interactions with the people there, that they are very, very, very collectively passionate about the business and the mission, and they've done an incredible job. You know, the valuation, $1 billion valuation within 2 years of being founded. I mean, it's quite incredible. But regardless, I think Juno is leaning into that individualism, which is to say, you know, to companies that today people are interested in what they can get in terms of everything, and in well-being and benefits. It's really a no-brainer. I mean, come on, how can you provide something beneficial to 700 different people? I mean, that's insane. It's not possible. If you have 3 options, you know, do you want a gym, you know, gym membership, you know, subsidized, or do you want health insurance, or do you want, you know, yoga? Come on, 700 people out of 700, you might interest 100. And so it really is about leaning into that and giving people a lot more choices, a bigger breadth of choices, giving them the power to vote with their own allowance. And the companies love that, because they're like, oh God, the tyranny of the individual, like the amount of different people and personalities. And there's not, you know, not less than 20 people, clients or people that I've spoken to, that have said to me, oh God, I hate this benefits thing, because no matter what we bring on, someone's unhappy. Someone's got something to say. And it's like, yeah, so come to us and we'll handle it. So I think we lean into it. I think you can't, you know, with the remote work stuff and the stuff after COVID, there was an attempt to deny the reality, but you've got to roll with the punches. Like, if people want to work remotely, whether you think it's going to be more productive or not, it's kind of irrelevant. Because the idea that you're now going to push against that tide and say, well, we work in the office, and limit your candidate pool to between 10 and 15 miles, like, of that office, you know, it just, I understand there are benefits, sure, but the point is, the world is, it's where the world is going is completely undeniable. We're going to be more flexible, more individualized. It's just the way it is. And so you might as well get a head start.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, as I record this podcast, I'm in Tenerife. I'm working remotely from here. But there's so much that I want to pick up on what you just said, Ali. So this idea of the individual, I think it's been around from a consumer perspective, let's say, for a while. So if you think back to the day, and I don't know if you're saying that you're a millennial, I don't know if you're too young to remember this, but like old school maps where you had to pick out the map and you had to find out where you were and where you wanted to go. And now we have Google Maps, and Google shows you where you are, and all you need to do is tell it where you want to go, because it already knows where you are. And the Coca-Cola bottles, see, there's the examples I always remember, the Coca-Cola bottles that had individual people's names on it, and you want to buy it because it has your name on it, you know? So I think from a consumer perspective, we've been going down this individual road for a long time. And for a long time, work has remained at this very one size fits all. We have a couple of different options to choose from. And from another perspective, I love this idea of satisfying the individual, because the research I did as part of my dissertation looked at or showed that the importance of need satisfaction at work. And I think it's really, really crucial. And so there's some universal needs that everyone has, but there are also some unique needs that each individual has. And I think at a manager level, it's really important to have those discussions and to understand what those needs are at that level, and to be able to satisfy the employee needs at the individual level, rather than saying, oh, this team needs or this organization needs, and try and satisfy needs at that level. So it's brilliant to bring it back down, I think, to the individual.
Well, I think that there still needs to be, you know, of course, you know, another analogy is the fact that I don't, but no, you know, I do. I have one social media profile, which is LinkedIn. I need it for work. But, you know, we all have these profiles. We have these representations of ourselves. We have our own advertising.
Yeah.
We have our Instagram pages and our LinkedIn and our Twitter and these things, and they're all intended to showcase ourselves and the things that we want people to see. And it's quite bizarre if you think about it. I think, kings and queens of old would have been absolutely blown away by the local coffee influencer in Denver's following. Like, oh my God, this person can reach 7,000 people
at
once, so we have this ability, which is really incredible. Now, what I would say, though, is there is a threat, right? Because individuals' needs being met, they're not just at work, right? It's everywhere in the world, right? In life, we want our needs met, and that's natural. Now, the thing is that if I was to use another analogy, it would be, square pegs in round holes is not even the right one, because it's two squares. There's no receptacle. There's no sort of like, there's no docking in any way. There are two individuals who are incentivized to maximize their own ends. Now, what's needed in work is compromise, and compromise means for people to be able to give and to sacrifice. And I'm guilty of this, right? I'm guilty, I have to be completely honest with you, of pushing someone when they're resistant to my ideas as a CEO, or resistant to the sort of direction that I would like to go. And they're very resistant to that. And I realized too late that it was because the more you push, the more you try and get your side across, the more you try and get your personal agenda across. People have this is what I'm learning in this book, people have a very innate autonomy, right? People have a very innate need to be autonomous and to feel like they have free will. And so when you have this kind of two squares, no hole whatsoever, just like this bashing against each other of individuality, you're not really going to get anywhere. So I think it's important that, yeah, of course, people are individuals, and we have to admit that and accept it and identify that, but use that to our advantage by building bridges and allowing people to understand that their ends will be met if the collective end is met. Because I don't think you can't build a successful business, especially a startup, in a very competitive environment, without people being able to, in the long term, have an idea that they're going to succeed. But, to be able to say, well, I'm going to work on the weekend because I really want this thing to be done. I don't want to let my colleagues down, and so on and so forth. See what I'm saying? So there needs to be a compromise for things to work.
Absolutely, yeah. So I like this, I suppose, thinking about it from the perspective of each individual wants their own needs met, but they need to find ways to work with each other for the greater good of the organization. Is that kind of where you're going with that?
Yeah, I mean, to delay the instant the personal gratification.
Okay,
To sort of say, and this is one of the pet peeves I have sometimes, is you think like, in the same way that, working out or doing anything worthwhile, just like suffer for a few months or years, because in the end, you're going to have a real pride in having achieved what you achieved, stuck at it, and you were gritty. And you push yourself, and you can be proud of the fact that you pushed through the discomfort. One of the things that's a bit of a, if I'm being completely honest, a bit of a red flag for me when I interview folks is this kind of, I can tell when it's authentic, and I can tell when it's not, but kind of an interest in well-being in Juno, and do we have work-life balance? And of course we do, and we have a lot of policies and systems that allow people to just kind of tell us that they're taking holiday rather than ask us, for example. But I also think it's worth people being uncomfortable, being uncomfortable, working, doing things that are difficult, going to the gym. I go to the gym. It's not fun all the time, but I'm doing it because I want to build long-term health, and I want to be proud of myself for pushing through. So I would say that, life isn't, the pursuit of pleasure is a folly. It's not something that is going to get you anywhere. Now you can find a lot of happiness and pride in being uncomfortable. And of course, we're not advocating toxicity at all, and bullying or harassment. That's beside the point. There's the difference between martial arts and getting beaten up, right? Like there's honor in one, and there's not in another. So I think it is important that people do kind of, I feel at least, identify that there is pleasure at the end of the pain.
Yeah. So if we kind of take that back to a well-being and need satisfaction and personalization, individualistic approach, is really saying that your needs are not necessarily going to be met eventually, but if you continue on with the discomfort maybe that you're feeling because you're frustrated because your needs are not being met, and you get to the other side of that, there might be something even better waiting for you because of this delayed gratification. So you're putting up with some kind of short-term pain.
We've been doing it all our lives.
Yeah.
School. I mean, most of us went to school, and for those of us that went to university and studied and did a dissertation, that wasn't fun.
Well, that was the other thing that I was going to say that kind of sprang to mind when we're talking about this. And for me, it's not I'll be happy when, or it's kind of some anonymous time in the future. And maybe let's come back to this gym example that you shared, because I think that's very relatable. People, whether they go to the gym or not, they can certainly relate to the process involved. So for me, it's more about the process, and whatever you're doing at the time brings you joy, rather than doing something that is innately horrible to do with the idea that in the future I'm going to be promoted, and when I'm promoted I'll be happy, or in the future I'll be happy, or when I lose weight I'll be happy. So it's more about, I'm doing the exercise because I know it's good for me. I'm doing the exercise actually because it's something I find that's fun, or it's good for my mental health, or I feel better after doing it at the time, even if it's sore, even if it's painful as I do it. I know that it's something that's kind of good for me. Is that resonating?
Yeah, of course, because any kind of any accepted wisdom would tell you that all of your opportunities are on the other side of your pain. Like, just is the case. It's not. I'm not saying to let another person take advantage of you, or do something that is going to be traumatic, of course. But, I think it really depends on where you are in your life. At the end of the day, in a startup, you don't even have the right to exist. Juno is a business that just, through sheer force of will, stubbornness, and the talent of the people that I brought around, the people that are in the early stages and even now, who sacrificed a lot of time, effort, energy, peace of mind. That is the name of the game. And then the ultimate pride is, oh my God, before it happened, there was no Juno, there was no people getting taking their kid on their first vacation through their benefits. There was just nothing. That didn't exist. And now we made that happen.
Yeah.
And so the pain was worth it.
Yeah. So it's turning an idea that you had into reality, but it's an acknowledgement, and maybe, something I jotted down as well. It's finding that balance between how much pain is too much, and is the pain, like knowing that you're going to have success, I suppose, at the other side of that, versus doing something you really don't enjoy in the hopes that something is going to change, versus doing something that is going to have an impact on the world.
But I might be putting me out of a job, but I think it is also about mindset. Like, maybe if you had a business that invested in top specialists in ensuring people have the right mindset, and this sounds quite dystopian when I say it, but the point being, we just talked about it. This is a generally white collar issue, because we don't hear, or very often at least, or we demonize, let's call them more blue collar workers. We demonize the nurses and the rail workers and the postal workers that strike because their pay isn't being increased, or their working conditions aren't good enough, or they're not being treated in the way that they need to be, and they're not able to unionize, and so on and so forth. Like, we don't but someone saying that they work for a toxic workplace culture, and I'm not denying that it isn't the case, but our society seems to be very, very focused on that. And I speak to people that are 10 years younger than me. I'm only 31, but people who've just started their career. And you do hear far too often people say, well, I don't want to do that. I don't really like that. And it's like, yeah, but you're lucky that you have a degree and you
have that choice, you have that
a
option.
law firm, you know, and I worked in the first year of Juno, I worked making coffee and tea and being a barista and a waiter. And I loved that. I ended up hating it, but I started off hating it, but I ended up loving it because you just tell yourself, well, first of all, I'm making money, which is good. Second of all, I'm meeting different people. So I think it is a mindset thing. Like, do you really hate your job, or is it something else? You know, is it something? And that's the ultimate question that I ask, you know, myself about my life sometimes. But you know, we need to make sure that this kind of well-being thing is framed in the correct way.
I love that. I'm just going to repeat it for the listeners. Do you really hate your job, or is it something else? So, I mean, that kind of opens a can of worms for a whole other podcast episode, I would say. As in, is it something else that you're maybe not happy about in your life, or you're not progressing as quickly as you thought? So maybe it's not necessarily the situation you find yourself in, or maybe you're not asking for the opportunities, maybe you're not putting yourself out there, maybe you're not networking enough to make those connections that you need in order to be successful at work. So a really powerful question, I think, and maybe for anyone listening today, ask yourself that. Is it the fact that do you actually really hate your job, or is there some specific actions that you could take in order to make things better for yourself?
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Ally, the question I ask everyone who comes on the Happier at Work podcast, what does being happier at work mean to you?
Great question. I think, first of all, having a group of people around you that make you feel supported and empowered, and that you feel you're doing enough to support, empower your colleagues. Because, you know, you work with people, right? You leave bad managers and you stay with good ones. And that's just the way, the old adage. I think a lot of people, most people will say, and I will agree, that having a mission and a genuine impact is very important. And at least, you know, in the long run, feeling as though the work that you're doing is having an impact internally and is being valued, and you're being valued for your contribution. So those are the three systemic ones. And then obviously the ancillary things are, you know, having the empowerment to choose where you work, how you work, what benefits you have, for example, being treated like an adult, removing that sort of parental transaction that's been so rampant in companies. And I think that I leave it at those few.
And again, like, to me, that opens up a whole load of other conversations. Like, you're so right about this adult versus parent and being treated like a child when you're at work as well. So maybe that's another topic for a future episode. If people want to find out more about Juno, if they would like to connect with you, what's the best place that they can do that?
Absolutely. So the website for Juno is withjuno.com. So withjuno.com. And you can find everything you need to know on our site, I would hope. My name is Ally Fekaiki, so that's a bit of a doozy to spell. So Ally, and then my surname is Fekaiki. And you can find me on LinkedIn, so hit me up, and I'd love to. Yeah, if anyone wants to have a conversation, I'm all ears.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing your insights today. Really insightful chat. Really enjoyed it. So really appreciate it. Thank you.